The music room had not been opened in 10 years. June Whitlock knew this the moment the door gave way, not from resistance, but from the quality of its silence. Dust lay across every surface. The grand piano stood in the center beneath a black cloth, like something in mourning for itself. She had been sent here with a bucket, a cloth, and instructions from the head of staff. Clean the music room, polish the instrument, prepare everything for a private concert in 4 days. There was a portrait on the wall. A boy of about 13, sitting before the piano with his hands resting lightly on the keys, looking not at the camera, but somewhere beyond it. A guard had followed her to the door and stopped there. "Do not touch the piano." The boss buried that part of himself for a reason. June nodded and stepped inside alone. She was lifting the cloth from the piano, carefully. From the corner, when one of the keys sounded on its own, a single low note. It rose into the room and held for a moment, then faded back into the silence it had interrupted. It was not a ghost. After 10 years sealed in a room where humidity had shifted with every season, a hammer held under tension had finally let go. It was pressure, trapped long enough to sound like one. She set the cloth aside and looked at the music stand. A sheet of manuscript paper had been left there, curled at the edges and yellowed with age. June had not studied at a conservatoire. She had learned piano at a church on scholarship money that ran out in the 3rd year. The house had looked at June's body and decided she belonged near buckets, not music stands. Men like Bellini heard refinement only when it came from thin hands in silk sleeves. June had learned long ago that skill did not always arrive in the shape rich rooms expected. She had also learned that rooms which ignored the shape of her usually forgot she was listening. No one had considered, when they sent her with the heavy bucket to clean a room full of music, that she might be able to read what was inside it. She could read a treble clef. She knew what a motif looked like when one was repeated. 4 short notes, a pause, 2 notes falling. The same pattern appeared 3 times on the page, written into different bars, as though the composer kept returning to it involuntarily. The way a person returns to a word they are not sure they should say. In the margin beside the 3rd repetition, in pencil so faint she had to angle the paper toward the window, someone had written 2 words, Marco Bell. Marco Bell was not a musician. He had been a capo of the Sorrento family, a man who had, according to the staff who still spoke his name at all, simply vanished from his post 8 years ago without explanation. She turned to the next page. A different motif, 5 notes climbing, then breaking sharply downward. Another name in the margin. Another man she had heard referenced in the past tense. The room was not haunted. It was keeping a list. He arrived before she heard him, not footsteps, but the quality of a silence that changes when someone with authority enters it. Rafael Sorrento stood in the doorway. He did not look like a man who had been told his maid was cleaning. He looked like a man who had heard something he had spent 10 years arranging not to hear. His eyes went to the piano first. The cloth was folded neatly on the bench. His eyes moved to the music stand, then to June. He crossed the room without raising his voice, which was more frightening than shouting would have been. "Who gave you permission to open those pages?" June set the manuscript down with both hands, unhurried. "No one. I was cleaning the stand when I saw the name in the margin. Marco Bell." Something moved across his face, brief, controlled, gone before she could name it. You read music, enough to recognize a pattern being repeated. The same 4 notes appear 3 times on that page, always before his name. Rafael took the page from the stand without looking at it. Pianos do not confess, Miss Whitlock. June looked at him steadily. No, but neglected ones remember where pressure was left. The room held the words between them. He turned toward the door. Leave. June did not move immediately. There are more pages. Each one has a motif. Each motif has a name in the margin. Every name I recognize belongs to someone in this household who is no longer here. Rafael stopped with his back to her. You have been a maid in this house for 11 days. 11 days is long enough to hear a name repeated in past tense and wonder why. A long pause. When he turned back, his expression had shifted into something more careful. Then read it, all of it. And if you are lying to me about what you see, I will know before the last note. He set the page back on the stand and left. June looked at the portrait of the 13-year-old boy on the wall. His hands on the piano keys, his eyes somewhere else entirely. She picked up the next page from the stack. June did not work quickly. She worked the way she had always worked, methodically, without assumptions. She laid the pages across the floor when the music stand ran out of room. Each one contained at least one repeated motif, a short melodic phrase that interrupted the larger piece the way a name interrupts a sentence. Marco Bell, 4 notes short and clipped. A pause, 2 falling like a stone dropped. Aldo Ren, 5 notes climbing, then breaking off as though something had cut the phrase short. Father Neri, a fragment of plain chant. 2 notes flattened, turned wrong in a way that felt deliberate. Samuel Costa, 3 beats, 1 rest, 3 beats again, like something knocking to be let in. The 5th motif she recognized, not from a name in the margin, but from a melody one of the older women hummed in the kitchen, Antonio. When Rafael returned, he found June on the floor, in the center of the manuscript pages, with a staff notebook open across her knee, drawing connecting lines between dates and names. She pointed to the first column without preamble. These are the dates the motifs appear in your old lesson books. Here are the names of the men each motif was assigned to. Here are the dates each of those men disappeared or died. Rafael studied the columns. The lesson books were written by Bellini. He set the curriculum. Each motif appears in the lesson material before the corresponding person died, sometimes weeks before, sometimes days. He was quiet. Bellini called them dedication motifs. He said they were a way of honoring the men at the table during salon performances, a gift of personalized music. June looked up at him. Someone taught the room to listen to you in a language you did not know you were speaking. Raphael's jaw tightened. His eyes moved across the pages on the floor, reading not the music, but the memory attached to it. What it had felt like to be 12 years old, playing for men who were watching a child's hands with too much attention. Bellini taught me those passages in private sessions. He said a great pianist must be able to give each listener a piece of the music they could call their own. He said it the way someone reads from a document they no longer believe in. Who else understood the motifs as signals? The men in the room who knew the code. Bellini's network. I was a child playing music at my father's dinner table. June closed the notebook. You were not giving orders. You were being used as a broadcasting system that no one would question because you were 12 years old and your father was proud of you." Rafael walked to the window and stood there with his back to her. June did not fill the silence. Some silences are not meant to be managed. The next morning, 3 people made themselves impossible to ignore. The first was Lucio Ven. Lucio was Rafael's consigliere, a man old enough to have known Antonio, who carried the gravity of someone who has outlived the man he swore loyalty to. He held the only other key to the music room. He had been the one to lock it after Antonio's death. When June asked whether he had known about the motifs, he did not deny it. "I heard patterns I could not read. I knew the room was being used for something I did not fully understand. I locked it because I was afraid that if Bellini returned, he would find a way to continue." He met her eyes steadily. "Locking the door was the only instrument I had." June believed him. Lucio had made the wrong choice, but he had made it out of caution rather than complicity. That was a different kind of guilt. The second was Sophia Rill. Sophia was the piano tuner who had maintained the Sorrento instrument for 15 years. She arrived that afternoon and went directly to the music room. Not to the strings or the hammer mechanisms, but to one specific key. The key June had identified as bearing one of Antonio's pencil marks on the underside of the frame. Sophia was not tuning it. June watched from the doorway long enough to be certain. Sophia was adjusting the key to maintain a very slight misalignment. Not enough to be heard as a mistake, enough to prevent a particular resonance. Sophia looked up and saw her watching. The explanation came quickly, practiced, and not quite credible. "The boss asked me to preserve the instrument's original character. Certain keys were intentionally voiced this way." June said nothing. She noted it and moved on. The third was Dario Mott. Dario was a capo who had lost his older brother in the years when Rafael had been playing salon concerts. He found June in the corridor and made no pretense of pleasantry. If those notes gave orders, then the hand that played them must answer. The families who lost people are owed a reckoning. He left without waiting for a response. June stood in the corridor for a moment after he was gone. She understood now, with perfect clarity, what the concert in 4 days actually was. It was not a performance. It was a trial. Maestro Bellini arrived the following morning, looking exactly as a man who had nothing to hide should look. He was older than his photographs, but not diminished. The kind of man who carries his age with deliberate grace. He embraced Rafael with warmth. He spoke with elegant sorrow about the decade of silence. He noticed June immediately, but addressed her last, and briefly. "Music requires discipline, Miss Whitlock, not curiosity." He smiled as he said it, the smile of a man who considers the conversation already finished. He did not look at her the way a man looks at a threat. He looked at her the way a man looks at furniture that has wandered too close to the piano. June held his gaze. "I was curious about the dedication motifs in the old lesson books. The men those motifs were assigned to all died or disappeared within weeks of hearing them." A pause. Barely perceptible. "You are turning grief into superstition." Rafael stood between them in silence. Bellini sat at the piano without being asked and played the opening of the Requiem for Antonio. It was beautiful, genuinely, disarmingly beautiful. The kind of music that makes an argument difficult because it asks you to feel before you think. June listened to the bass line. It did not mourn. It measured. It moved forward with the steady, even progression of something marking intervals. 3 beats. A rest. 3 beats again. Not a lament. A countdown. She said it quietly, almost to herself. That is not mourning. That is counting down. Bellini's hands stilled on the keys for half a second, less than that. But in a room with a piano, half a second of unplanned silence is a sound of its own. Rafael had heard it too. That night, June found Rafael standing outside the music room door. He had not opened it yet. She stopped a few feet away and waited. After a moment, he pushed the door open and went inside. She followed without being invited, because she understood that some moments require a witness. I want to see the Requiem, the original draft. June hesitated. It is the most personal thing you have left of him. He looked at her. Then my private grief may be hiding a public murder. She retrieved the original handwritten draft and spread it across the piano lid. Rafael read it slowly. He stopped near the 3rd movement, Marco's motif, Aldo's motif. Father Neri's plain chant turned wrong, Samuel's 3-beat knock, and Antonio's own melody, the lullaby that should have been private, written into a requiem for the man himself, as though the composition had swallowed the very thing it was meant to mourn. Near the bottom of the last page, a single note had been circled in pencil, in a different hand than the composition. Beside it, barely legible, 5 words. Do not play it as he taught you. June looked at the handwriting. That is your father's hand. Rafael set the page down very carefully. Lucio appeared in the doorway then, drawn by some consigliere's instinct for the moment when things break open. Antonio found the lesson books 4 months before he died. He could not prove the motifs were signals without a recording of Bellini giving instruction. He was building toward it when they killed him. Rafael turned from the manuscript. He knew what Bellini was doing, and he did not stop the lessons. He did not stop them because stopping them without evidence would have let Bellini walk away. He was waiting for the right moment to catch him in the act. Rafael looked at his own hands. The way you look at something you have been given without understanding what it costs. My father died because I played what I was told. June answered without hesitation. No, your father died because someone made a child carry knives inside music. Silence. Rafael kept looking at his hands. These hands were trained before they were old enough to choose. June looked at the circled note on the manuscript page. Then tonight, use them to choose badly for the right reason. He looked up at her. For the first time since she had entered this house, he looked at her not as a maid who had wandered into the wrong room, but as the only person in it who had come with no stake in what the music meant, and had listened anyway. Lucio spoke carefully, the way a man speaks when he is finally releasing something he has held closed for a decade. Below the stage, beneath the hollow section of flooring, directly under the piano, there was a recording room. Antonio had built it after he first began to suspect, working with one carpenter he trusted and no one else. He needed Bellini to speak the instructions out loud, not in code, but in the room, with the man present. He was killed before he could arrange it. How does it open? Lucio looked at the manuscript still spread across the piano lid. Antonio told me, in the last week before he died, that the mechanism opened with a note from no piece in Bellini's standard repertoire. June looked at the circled note. Do not play it as he taught you. Bellini had controlled every note Rafael played by maintaining the correct version, the approved performance, the technique Rafael had been trained to deliver automatically. The recording room could only be opened by a note Bellini had taught Rafael to avoid, which meant it could only be opened by someone who had heard what Bellini taught and chose, deliberately, not to obey. June looked at Rafael. "Your father did not build this for himself. He built it for whoever was willing to play the note he was never allowed to play." The concert was scheduled for 9 o'clock. By 8, the music room had filled with people who had not been invited to a concert. They had been summoned to a hearing. Dario Mott sat in the front row with the expression of a man who has already decided the verdict. Bellini stood near the piano, speaking quietly to Rafael in the tone of a teacher preparing a student for an examination. Sofia had arrived an hour early and went directly to the piano with her tools. June watched from the doorway as Sofia's hand paused near the pedal mechanism. Checking, June was certain that the stage floor's trigger remained in its dormant position. Bellini had not needed Sofia's loyalty. He had needed her debt. Her brother's contract sat in a folder in Bellini's office, and it had sat there for 6 years. That was the instrument he had played her with. Dario addressed the room before the music began. If the composition contains what certain parties claim, a systematic record of assassination orders delivered through the instrument, then the hand that played those orders must answer to this council. The seat, the ledger, and the western ports are subject to immediate review. He sat down. Rafael stood at the piano. He did not look at Bellini. June crossed the room from the wall where she had been standing. "May I turn pages?" Every person in the room looked at her. She was aware, in the way she had always been aware in rooms like this, of the slight adjustment that happens when a body like hers enters a space like this one. She had spent her whole life being reassessed and found inconvenient. She had learned to stay very still until people decided what to do with her, and then to move while they were still deciding. Bellini's voice came smoothly. A maid turning pages for a requiem she cannot understand. June looked at him without flinching. "I understand enough to know when a funeral is being conducted for the wrong man." Rafael looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and pulled the bench slightly to allow her space beside him. Rafael began to play. The room went quiet in the way rooms only go quiet when the sound inside them is genuinely worth hearing. June stood beside him, hands at her sides, eyes on the pages. She watched the motifs arrive one by one. Marco's 4-note pattern, Aldo's rising phrase, Father Neri's corrupted plain chant, Samuel's 3-beat knock, each one woven into the composition so seamlessly that only someone who had spent 2 days cataloging them would have been able to hear where ordinary music ended and signal began. In her peripheral vision, Sofia moved one step closer to the piano. She was making for the pedal mechanism. If she reached it before the circled note arrived, she could reset the floor trigger to its dormant state. The recording room would stay closed. The concert would conclude, and Bellini would have the time he needed to shape what the council decided to believe. June moved. She stepped forward, sat beside Rafael, and rested her hands on the keys in the space to his left. She had not played in 3 years. Her hands knew this. They were hands that had carried buckets and scrubbed tile and pressed themselves flat against cold stone floors. They were not the hands the room had been built for. She used them anyway. Bellini was on his feet. "Stop!" Rafael kept playing. His voice came low and absolute. "No, let the wrong note finish." June found the passage she had memorized from Antonio's manuscript. The transition into the final movement, the place where the circled note lived. Her left hand found the chord. Her right found the single note that Bellini had trained Rafael never to play in this context. She pressed the sustain pedal with her foot. She played the wrong note. It did not sound wrong. That was the thing that silenced the room more completely than any protest could have. The note Bellini had classified as an error sounded, in context, like a resolution, like something that had been waiting to be said. It held one beat. 2. Under the stage, something moved. The floor beneath the piano shifted, a section of boards sliding back on a mechanism that had been waiting 10 years for exactly this instruction. The darkness below it was deep and very quiet. Bellini stood completely still. That was worse than running. June lifted her hands from the keys. The recording room was exactly as small as Lucio had described. A chair, a reel-to-reel machine, old and carefully maintained. A ledger, a folder of manuscript pages covered in handwritten notes. Lucio brought the tapes up and threaded the first reel. Antonio's voice filled the room. "My name is Antonio Sorrento. I am making this recording because I do not believe I will be alive to deliver this testimony in person. What follows is a full account of what I have found. The room did not move. Maestro Bellini has been using my son's piano lessons to transmit assassination orders to his network within this family and 3 allied families. Each target was assigned a unique musical motif. Rafael was taught these motifs as dedication passages. He did not know what the motifs signified. He was 12 years old. He played what he was taught. The fault is mine for not seeing it sooner, and Bellini's for engineering a system that used a child as its instrument. The tape continued. Names, dates, motifs, deaths. Then a second voice entered the recording, one that everyone in the room recognized. "You cannot bring this to the council, Antonio. You have no witness. You have a boy playing piano and a teacher who will call you paranoid." And Antonio's answer, "I have this room. I have these tapes. I have a son whose hands were used without his knowledge, and I will not allow him to carry that when he is old enough to understand it." Then Bellini again, very quiet. "You raised a son with perfect hands. I taught him to deliver death without touching a weapon." The tape ran for a few more seconds and went silent. The room held the recording the way it had held the wrong note, with the stillness of people confronting something that will not fit back into the shape it had before they heard it. Bellini spoke from across the room, his voice still precise. "These recordings are old. The provenance of the ledger has not been established. You are asking this council to condemn a man on a dead man's tapes and a maid's interpretation of sheet music." Sophia spoke from the corner. Her voice was not controlled at all. "He paid me. He paid me to keep the mechanism dormant and to maintain the piano's key tension. He told me it was to preserve the original tuning. He told me I owed him because of my brother's contract." She was not looking at Bellini. She was looking at the open floor beneath the piano. "I thought I was preserving an instrument. I did not know I was preserving a crime scene." She closed her eyes. "I am sorry, not to Bellini, to everyone in this room whose names were in those pages." Dario sat down slowly. His leverage had been built on the premise that Rafael's hands were guilty. The tapes did not leave room for that premise. Dario did not forgive Rafael. He only understood, finally, that the hand he wanted punished had been 12 years old when Bellini used it. The council had heard Antonio's voice, Bellini's voice, and the list of names, not in June's reconstruction, but in the words of the man who had died, rather than let his son carry the weight of it alone. Rafael had not spoken since the floor opened. He stood beside the piano in the silence of someone who has just been told a story about himself that changes every previous version of it. Not absolved, changed. He looked at Bellini. He nodded to Lucio. Bellini was taken from the room alive to be held for the council's full testimony process, not killed. Because a dead man carries his secrets out of reach. A living one who can be questioned is worth more to the truth. When the last person had gone, the music room was very quiet. June was gathering the manuscript pages from the floor, working methodically, as she had worked the first afternoon in this room. He spoke without turning. "You played the wrong note." June set the last page into the folder. "No, I played the one he taught you to avoid." Rafael turned and looked at his hands again, less horrified than the night before. More uncertain, the way you look at something you are learning to recognize as still yours. "My father spent the last year of his life trying to protect me from knowing what my hands had done. He built a room under this floor and filled it with evidence so that one day someone would hear the truth from his voice and not mine." He paused. He did not get to tell me himself. There was nothing to say to that except to let him say it. June let him. After a moment, he crossed to the piano bench and sat, not to play, just to sit, the way people sit in places they have been avoiding once the avoidance is no longer possible. One day, you can write something that does not carry a dead man's name. He looked at her, and until then, June set the folder aside. Until then, we stop pretending silence is healing. He stood, opened the cabinet below the music stand, the one with the lock he had not touched in 10 years, and took out the key. He held it for a moment, looking at it with the expression of someone deciding what a thing means now that it means something different. He held it out to her. Nothing in this room gets buried because someone decided whose ears were worth training. June looked at the key. She did not take it immediately. "I am still the maid." Rafael's voice was level and entirely serious. "Tonight, you heard what every trained man in this house missed." She took the key. He did not lock the music room when they left. He walked out and left the door standing open behind him. And the room stayed open, the way rooms stay open when they have finally been allowed to breathe. Weeks later, there was a page of blank manuscript paper on the music stand. Rafael had placed it there and not yet written on it. June stood beside him, looking at it one morning. She asked what it said. Nothing dead yet. Rafael Sorrento had locked the music room because he believed silence would bury his father's ghost. But the piano had never been haunted. It had been waiting for someone poor enough to be ignored, trained enough to listen, and brave enough to play the wrong note on purpose. Was June right to break the performance with the wrong note? Or should Rafael have been allowed to finish the requiem before the truth destroyed it? Tell us what you think in the comments below, and subscribe to Mafia Hearts and Secrets for more dangerous stories from the houses of the underworld.